Hello, I'm Sally Wiener Grotta, and this is Judith Magazine's Tell Me More, where I chat with Jewish authors, editors, and other creatives about the stories behind their creations.
Hello. Today my guest is Houman Sarshar, who is an independent scholar, a consulting editor, a contributing author to the Encyclopedia Iranica, as well as a contributing author to the Encyclopedia of Jews in the Islamic World. His PhD is from Columbia. To date, Houman has edited and co-edited 7 volumes on the history of Jews in Iran, among them Esther's Child, a portrait of Iranian Jews. Esther means so much to me from my childhood. And the Jewish communities of Iran, entries on the Judeo-Persian communities of Iran, published by the Encyclopedia Iranica. He has also published numerous articles on modern Persian literature for the Encyclopedia Iranica. In addition to his writings, Houman is a private collector of modern Iranian art. That piece behind him is not one of his, but I love it. With a collection of nearly 200 museum-quality works by all the leading artists of the movement. I hope to talk about that a little bit with you. Houman is also the founder of Kimia Foundation, a culture foundation dedicated to promoting the art, culture, and history of Iran. With over 5,000 original photographs, the Kimia Foundation holds the largest archive of Qajar court photography outside the Golestan Palace in Tehran. Houman is presently working on his next book about the role of boy dancers in the history of Iran's entertainment world. That sounds fascinating. Welcome, Houman. Thank you for joining me today. I'm delighted we could get together. Before we get started, I'd love you to read a bit. Is this going to be from your book, Esther's Children?
Yes, it's from Esther's Children. It's the introduction from Esther's Children. The first part of the introduction. The introduction itself is a little bit long, but I think the first part will start to give everyone a little bit of a sense of my own experience as an Iranian Jew, and then we can talk about, the contents of the book itself if you want, so that anyone who's interested may be able to go and take a look there for themselves.
Of course. Please proceed.
Okay. It was the first day of school. I had just turned 6, and after what seemed an endless summer, I was finally starting first grade. My family lived in a modest 3-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building near Jordan Boulevard in the northern part of Tehran. On that fall morning of September 21st, the warm, narrow kitchen of my parents' home was filled with excitement. Sitting at the kitchen table with my father and older brother, I watched my mother smile with pride in her hurried frenzy to send us off to school. "You're a big boy today. It's your first day in school. You're going to learn so much. You'll learn to read, to write. You'll make so many new friends." And so she carried on, and she ran back and forth, smiling, laughing, preparing my lunch like I had watched her do for my brother for the last 2 years. Dressed in my new school clothes, I was wearing the Golden Star of David pendant that my grandmother had brought back for me from Israel earlier that summer. Sitting across from me, calm, somewhat distant, with a sternness that at that particular moment so sharply set him apart from my mom, my father was drinking his morning tea. As my mother went on about my first day in school, my dad leaned over and gently slipped the golden pendant under my shirt. That's not something for everyone to see. And if in school anyone asks you about your religion, lie. Tell them you're Muslim. A strange quiet filled the kitchen as my nervousness about the day ahead turned into confusion. My father was telling me to lie. "Stop filling the boy's head with nonsense," my mother protested. "Nobody cares about that sort of stuff anymore. Jewish, Muslim, what does it matter nowadays? We're all Iranian, and that's that. That's all that's important. Just tell them you're Iranian. Iranian like them. That's all. Muslim. Stop filling the child's head with nonsense." And she carried on packing my lunch. My father turned back towards me, and with the same seriousness and calm I would hear in his voice again some 5 years later, the night when he came into my room to tell me that we were leaving for the United States the next day, he said, "If anybody asks you your religion, you're allowed to lie." I was too young that day to understand fully all of the implications of what my father was telling me. My world in Iran had been largely a secular one, in which my Jewishness had never been a matter of contention. My nanny, who had raised both my mother and my brother, was Muslim, as were all of our neighbors and virtually every one of my parents' friends and colleagues. Everyone knew we were Jewish, and no one had ever made an issue of it. To them, as to us, my family's Jewish heritage was simply a matter of identity and cultural difference, a matter of benign otherness. In that secular world, being Jewish meant to me eating different foods every once in a while and hearing my father speak to his parents in the Judeo Persian dialect of Isfahan, a language I understood but could not speak. It meant watching my uncle break a glass before he kissed my aunt the night they got married. It meant that I was not allowed to sit in my grandmother's lap and laugh with her for 7 days after they called from Israel to say that her mother had passed away. These were the things that made me Jewish, I thought, and none of them seemed anything worth lying about. Nevertheless, later that day, when in the schoolyard my pendant slipped out from under my collar and a classmate asked me what it was, I tucked it back under my shirt and lied, as my father had said. It took nearly 25 years and the making of Esther's children for me to understand what had happened that first day of school in my mother's kitchen back in Tehran, and to recognize that my father's permission to lie was not a lesson in treachery or deceit, but rather a rite of passage, an initiation into a 2,700-year-old legacy of what it means to be an Iranian Jew, a legacy as old as the Bible itself, one that started with Esther when her uncle Mordechai told her to keep her Jewish faith a secret from King Ahasuerus in hopes of becoming queen. Esther lied, a lie that with time would prove vital to the survival of Iranian Jews throughout the 127 provinces of the realm of Ahasuerus. And in that lie, in her dissimulation of her true faith to save her people, Esther provided her children and their children after them with a sanction for religious dissimulation, to which they would instinctively revert for centuries to come at times of perceived threat or heightened religious persecution. On that first day of school, my father gave me permission to tell the same lie, and in so doing, he was handing down to me what by then was a millennially long tradition of dissimulation in the face of harm or anticipated injury, a tradition of keeping hidden a heritage carried out by our foreparents into diaspora so that I might survive and safeguard this ancient heritage and do my part in passing it on to the next generation of Esther's children.
Wow. Beautifully read and beautifully written. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do tell us a bit about Esther's Children, about the book. What does it consist of, and what would, other than your own personal experience, what prompted you to do it?
So Esther's Children is a 450-page, four-color coffee book table with over 500 photographs that document the history of Jews in Iran, from their arrival there about 2,700 years ago until the Islamic Revolution in 1978 and a little bit beyond. Mm-hmm. What prompted me to do it was that in 1995, my mother had started a foundation called the Center for Iranian Jewish Oral History. And I sat on the board of the foundation. And part of the foundation's mission was to organize annual conferences, academic conferences, where we would invite scholars from around the world to come and talk about Jewish Iranian history. And what had motivated my mom to start this project was the fact that, by then, some 15 years, 17 years into diaspora in Los Angeles, where the majority of Jewish Iranian expats lived, many of the elders of the community were dying and taking their stories and their experiences of what had happened in Iran between World War II and the revolution with them. Um, that had started an oral history project that ultimately ended up with 102 interviews, all of which have been transcribed and translated. But we also, for our conferences, decided to ask people to open their family albums and bring us photographs of their families, anything that documented the history of Jews in Iran in the 20th century.
Mhm.
And that also resulted in approximately 2,500 photographs that were collected. And like all nonprofit organizations, our trouble was also one of funding. So one day I had the idea that, we should, because these photographs were very popular, we would show them. We had a photography exhibit at every one of the conferences.
Mhm.
And I came up with the idea that, maybe we can select about 50 of the most popular ones, the most telling and beautiful ones, publish a small pamphlet and sell the pamphlet to be able to raise some funds to help us organize organize the conferences.
A small
And,
pamphlet.
and yeah, 6 years later, that small pamphlet became a 450-page coffee table book with contributions, 25 articles from scholars around the world, each discussing a specific part of Jewish Iranian history, from different historic eras to different cultural conflicts or conditions that we had to live in, to life cycle ceremonies. Everything is really covered. It provides a very well-rounded history of the Jews in Iran from their arrival there 2,700 years ago. And I'm very fortunate that we published exactly 7,000 volumes, and today there's only less than 100 left in storage. So it was a fairly popular publication, and my own. You asked me about my own inspiration. Very much like my mom, who noticed that all these elders are dying. My
Mhm.
experience was that, I'm kind of a rare bird in my own generation. My comfort with speaking Persian, writing Persian, and my familiarity with the history of Iran is a little different than most of my peers living outside of Iran. And it also was very obvious to me that this history, this rich history of what is the oldest community of Jews, uh, anywhere outside of Israel, outside of Judea, really, and a community without whom, arguably today's Judaism,
Mhm.
if it were at all even in existence, would certainly look very different had it not been for the very many interventions of Iranian Jews in pulling together this culture and safeguarding it. That many first generation Iranian Jews and second generation Iranian Jews living in the United States would completely lose touch with this history.
Mhm.
Because Habibi Levi, my predecessor, the historian who's written to this day what is the most important 3-volume history of Jews in Iran, has written it in Persian. And that book would no longer be available to these kids who no longer read or write Persian. So
Mhm.
writing Esther's Children, compiling Esther's Children was really a way for me to be able to um, protect this heritage, to archive it in a way that would allow others for years to come to really be able to access it and figure out who we are, where we came from, and how we lived in that country for so long.
Marvelous. A quick question. You mentioned the transcriptions into English of the interviews. Are they available on the internet? Can people access it?
They're not available on the internet, but a full copy of the entire archive of the Center for Iranian Jewish Oral History, a full digital copy, was left
Mhm.
at the Library of Congress. Another one was left with Tel Aviv University in Israel. Another one is at Haifa University, and another one is at UCLA. So there are four um, uh, you know,
Mhm.
institutions that all have in their archives the digital copy of everything that we put together.
Great.
And all of it is accessible to researchers, to scholars. Every one of these institutions agreed to take on um, this digital copy with the understanding that it will always be available to researchers at no charge should they need to access it. So yes, they are available.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I can imagine some novelists would love to get hold of and have the opportunity to study that. Now, you are a Mizrahi Jew, a Jew whose origins, the culture is based in the Middle East and Iran. Um, as such, your culture is very different from the prevailing Jewish cultures in the United States and Israel. The biggest one is Ashkenazi, which is my culture because my grandparents came from Central and Eastern Europe. Then we have the second group is the Sephardic, whose roots are in Spain and Portugal. I'd love it if you could help us understand a bit of how Mizrahi Jewish culture is different from the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic, without going into just basics, because I know that you could talk and I could listen happily to a very lengthy scholarly explanation. But if you could give me some highlights, that would be great.
Well, they differ in a lot of ways, really. But some of the examples would be, in Iran, all of the major centers of Jewish life, in the major cities, in Hamadan, in Isfahan, in Kermanshah, in Mashhad, in Yazd, in Shiraz, where you would find the majority, or up in near Kurdistan and up north, where you find the majority of the clusters of Jewish communities. Every one of these communities has their own Judeo-Persian language. Every one of these languages is a full-blown language. These are not dialects. They have their proper grammar, their own vocabulary. And what is interesting about it, unlike the Yiddish that's spoken throughout Europe by Sephardim and Ashkenazi Jews, uh, these dialects are not comprehensible to Jews of other communities.
Wow.
So, for example, my father, who passed away this past June, his family is from Isfahan. And my mom's family is from Shiraz. And these are multi-generational. They go back as far as anyone knows that these families have been living in those locations. And throughout their marriage, my father's family could be speaking to each other in front of my mom's family, and they would just absolutely not be able to understand a word of what the other one was saying. The languages are incomprehensible to the other. So this is one way in which we differ. Another way, unfortunately, mostly because of the exceptionally difficult cultural circumstances under which the Jews of Iran in particular lived, when it comes to material culture, the cultural life of Iranian Jews is not nearly as rich as that of Ashkenazi Jews, because there is really very little left. Starting in 1501, when the Safavid dynasty took over and declared the Shiite creed of Islam as the dominant form of Islam, all non-Shiites, including Sunnis, were considered second-class citizens. And considered impure, a notion in Shiism called nijasat, very, very close to the concept of the untouchables in the Indian sects. And a endless number of restrictions, social restrictions, economic restrictions were placed on all non-Shiites, but for a reason, that's still open to debate, this concept was most vehemently associated with Jews. And it led to pogroms, regular pogroms over the next 450 years, during which the entire community would be decimated, their private property would be looted. So there was very, very little that has survived.
Mhm.
In other ways, the Jews of Iran, in part because of this particular issue, and in part because of living in a Muslim land and the issues of the Pact of Omar and being dhimmis, um, more than Sephardic Jews or Ashkenazi Jews have played a role of culture heroes within their own land.
Mhm.
So, for example, these languages that I was talking to you about are, to this day, even though very, very few people, if any, of my generation still speak any of these languages, the older generation, my father's siblings and stuff, still do. And these languages are the last remnants, spoken remnants of ancient Persian languages, because they are the closest to what Persian languages were before the arrival of Islam. So, in this sense, many linguists who want to study ancient Persian languages have, including Dr. Yashater, my old um, mentor and the editor of the Encyclopedia Iranica, very quickly realized that, one venue into understanding ancient Persian languages was to study these languages today in Iran.
Mhm.
Um, and other restrictions. There were Jews also played a disproportionate part in maintaining and playing classical Persian music, because there were years on end where, not unlike the current condition in Afghanistan with the Taliban, where music was considered haram,
Mhm.
and all non-religious music was considered haram. Jews, because they were dhimmis, they were protected, they were allowed to live under their own rules. Um, they were able to be musicians. So at
Mhm.
life cycle ceremonies, imagine, I mean, for us, it's easy to forget. Everybody has a phone with, endless access to endless music from around the world. Up until fairly recently in human history, if you wanted to hear music, you had to either learn how to play it or pay someone to come and play it for you. So for centuries, the Jews of Iran played that role for the Iranian community. And these are just some of the ways in which we differ.
Yeah. How old were you when you came to the U.S.?
My family left Iran on December 5th, 1978, and I was 10 and a half years old at that time. Yeah.
That must have been quite a culture shock for you. It not only, I mean, you were Iranian, you were Mizrahi, neither of which were things that your classmates would be familiar with. Um, what was it like for you, and how did you learn to deal with that?
The truth is, it was very difficult. I did not speak a lick of English.
Mm.
My family's Francophile. I went to French school in Iran, and the school that I attended, Razi in Tehran, uh, only started teaching English to students after sixth grade. So I left in fifth grade, and
Mhm.
I never, ever had an opportunity to learn a single word of English when we came here.
Wow.
So that was very difficult. We also left literally practically overnight.
Mhm.
My father received a phone call in his office. He was the chief of urban planning and development for Iran's water and power ministry, which was the highest um, merit-based position in the Iranian government, held by a Jew for centuries, really. And uh, so, for example, the Natanz nuclear program that was bombarded by Israeli and American forces this past June, as my father was laying on his deathbed, the original plans for that nuclear station were drawn on my father's desk, under his supervision. He had a pretty high power in government. And so one day he received an anonymous phone call threatening his life, my mom's, and mine and my brother's. And Even though my parents had been debating for months about whether we should leave, until everything settles down and we come back, that phone call really made the decision for my family. We left. That he could receive that phone call on a Tuesday, and Thursday morning we were on a plane, and we left. We left everything behind. And my father was very clear that we're not allowed to even call our friends to say goodbye because we had to leave. So we came here. I had no understanding of English. I knew nothing about the American culture. And it took a really long time for me to be able to integrate. Um, we had a kind of a landing pad. My grandmother had come a few months before us, and she had purchased a home in Los Angeles up on Mulholland, where for a period of time, my mom's parents and my mom's younger sister, my mom's older sister, his wife, and his two children, and my parents, myself, and my brother were living in a 4-bedroom ranch house, basically trying to wait it out because everyone thought, everything was going to blow up, going to go back, which never happened. But for the few months that was the situation, I slept on the couch in the living room. So after everybody went to bed, I would just sneak around and turn on the TV and watch the last silver screen movie that they showed on television before everything clocked out at at midnight. And I would wake up in the morning and watch the Looney Tunes at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I tell people that Betty Davis and Bugs Bunny taught me how to speak English because that's how I learned how to speak. um,
Oh my.
but yeah, so it was very difficult at first.
Yes.
Eventually we got used to it.
Once you were used to being an American, and did you also find difficulty in integrating into Jewish communities that might not understand what Mizrahi is?
You know, um, I don't know that it was difficult. It just kind of felt to me like this is, like they're they're such weird Jews. Like, why are they doing all of these things? This has nothing to do with what we do. I didn't even know about uh, such a thing as Yiddish until when that house, my grandmother's house across the street, was a Jewish family. The father was of Iraqi descent. The mother was Canadian Jewish, and she was raised by Holocaust survivors. So they spoke Yiddish. She spoke Yiddish, and they spoke Hebrew at home. So mostly, I guess, because he was of Iraqi descent, it wasn't that different. But when she spoke Yiddish, I had no idea what she was talking. And I'm still very, very close friends with that family. Some 40 years later. But with that family, it wasn't that difficult. It was just understood that we're all Jewish, and we kind of had a meeting ground. But I can tell you that for the majority of the community, everybody was kind of lost. None of us really understood that we were Mizrahi. Everyone was kind of like, well, maybe we're Sephardic. So people started to join the Sephardic temples, and that didn't really make sense. And then so they started to join the Ashkenazi temples, mostly because, they were just more popular temples, I guess. But the community, by and large, started to identify in a strange way with Ashkenazi Judaism, and with Sephardic Judaism. And some of them still to this day, when I talk to them, I have to explain to them that we're actually Mizrahi, or our prayers are a little bit different, our cultural ceremonies are a little bit different. Many of the life cycle events that Iranians celebrate are very much influenced by the dominant Muslim Iranian culture. We wear black for for your spouse or your parent. People often wear black for up to a year. Our morning rituals, the foods we eat at the morning rituals are very different. So um, Yeah, but people mostly you will find a lot of Iranian Jews in the United States identifying with the Ashkenazi
Interesting.
ways of life. Yeah,
Were you bar mitzvahed?
I was bar mitzvahed at the Western Wall.
Oh, oh,
Um,
nice. Yeah.
yes, it was a very small ceremony. It followed a unfortunate tragedy in the family.
Mm.
My aunt was murdered 2 days before my planned bar mitzvah, so we postponed
Oh,
it for 9 days. My family sat shiva, and immediately when the shiva was over, everyone's like, it's a mitzvah, you can't put it off. We have to go back. So it's a very small ceremony, but yes, I was bar mitzvah at the Western Wall.
that's marvelous. I was going to ask you how the party was different, but obviously it would be a very different party.
Yeah, no, it was not. It was not a party. Bar mitzvahs, and also for Iranians, until we came here, they were very. I don't know how they happened in the United States before these, $1 million bar mitzvahs that
Well, yeah,
happen everywhere.
there's
Um, but in Iran, it was a very, very private family event. The parents, grandparents, maybe some of the aunts and uncles would go to shul on a Monday or a Thursday,
mhm,
and bar mitzvah would, just have his aliyah and recite the Torah prayers, and that was it. And unless they came from a particularly religious family or one educated um, in Hebrew, there was no Torah reading, none of that. You would just
mhm,
go and say the Torah prayer, and after the services were over, you were bar mitzvahed, and that was basically it.
yeah, interesting. I would believe that probably is what the original traditional um, bar mitzvah would have been, except
Correct.
maybe they would have read a little bit from the Torah. Um, Now, your next book is going to be on the role of boy dancers in the history of Iran's entertainment world, which sounds fascinating. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what stage you're at with it?
So the project really started because Professor Yashoter asked me to write the entry for the role of Iranian Jews in music, and
Okay.
classical and minstrel Persian music. But since when I was a child, my grandmother had always told me of boy dancers in Shiraz who put on women's clothes to perform at
Oh,
events, and how what the dynamics were in society with their roles. That there was a fairly kind of a unspoken, open secret of homoeroticism in the
mhm,
dynamic. And so this was a story that was always in the back of my head, and I knew that when I was writing that entry, what, like Esther's Children, what was supposed to be a brief encyclopedia entry, as I was writing it, turned into a 120-page work of research about the role of Iranian Jews in music. And when that section was over, I kind of went back to start writing what I thought would be a 10-page passage in the musical section about the role of these boy dancers. And that research took on really a life of its own. It took about 9 years of research that's still ongoing. It's turned into a 300-page um, work of history, cultural history.
mhm.
I have pulled together approximately 300 photographs and
Wow.
um, miniatures and works of painting from Iranian history, going all the way back to the medieval period. Because as I worked on this, I learned that these boy dancers were not just simple entertainers. They held a very, very, very important role in society. You would hardly have an event, a celebration, without them being present. They were almost always present in every king's court in Iran. During the early Sassanid period, the first, second through the 6th century of the Common Era, uh, Iranian boy dancers were the most valuable gift that Iranian merchants could send back to the Chinese court um,
Wow.
to gain favors in the silk trade up and down along the Silk Route. And they were also an important figure in Chinese culture. There's poetry written about them. They appear in their material culture, all of which was news to me and will be news to any of my readers, because what happened over the course of millennia when Iran met the West, when
Mm-hmm.
Iran encountered modernity in the mid 19th century and started to gain a level of self awareness and self consciousness in relation to the European West, we started to develop somewhat of an inferiority complex.
Oh.
And to compensate for that, a big segment of Iranian society started to push um, for the modernization of Iran and the adoption of many tenets and ways of Western modernity.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the underlying prevalent homoerotic dynamic that existed that went along with the lives of these boy dancers, um, the the very, very negative view that Western travel journalists, Western politicians, diplomats who traveled to Iran had about what was an accepted, understood, open relation of the society with homosexual relations among men.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, Many Iranian modernists felt that this was an issue that had to be corrected. If Iran was
Mm-hmm.
ever to fully integrate itself into the European culture and rise to the level of European modernity, we had to treat our women the same way. That meant unveiling them and taking them out of the women's quarters, allowing them to have a public social life,
Mm-hmm.
and to eliminate homosexuality from Iranian culture. And the belief was that these two issues were kind of tied together at the hip, that men in Iran tended towards homosexual behavior because access to women was unattainable. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so this fake story developed that these boy dancers dressed in women's clothes to entertain men as substitute sexual objects for the women who could not participate in their social gatherings.
Wow.
I discovered through my research, all of which is, documented with repeated, imagery over centuries, that first and foremost, these boy dancers were never trying to pass as women. They were
Mm-hmm.
never dressed in women's clothes. They were wearing what is the traditional clothes of boy dancers. And that the idea that homosexuality was prevalent in Iran because there was no access to women is also just misconstrued.
Right.
Nevertheless, as Iran modernized, within less than 4 decades, these boy dancers completely disappeared from the social scene in Iran. The last ones to have performed right around the end of World War II in Iran, um, and then they completely disappeared. And with it, the the collective unconscious and conscious awareness of who they were and the role they played in society also completely vanished, to the point where nobody remembers who they were and nobody remembers their purposes they served, and I often have to remind people, even Westerners, that even Alexander the Great was stopped dead in his track by a Persian boy dancer that he fell in love with in Shiraz. Uh, so it's a fascinating story and a exceptional window into the understanding of very many different social dynamics in Iran over centuries. And really, it provides a unique window into understanding Iran's relationship with modernity. And 95% of the research is complete. Life in the last 3-4 years has been a little complicated. I have two children. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. Uh, so my attention was kind of diverted from the final chapter of this research. But I hope to get back to it soon. And about 2 or 3 months of focused attention, I should be able to finish it and wrap it up. But I look forward to finishing it because I think it will provide a very new perspective for people on
Yeah.
Iran's encounter with Western modernity.
You'll have to let me know when it's published. It sounds fascinating.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes.
Marvelous. Now, one last sort of large question that maybe I should have started with, but I just wanted to, I really felt what you had to say about all this was so interesting. You and I met at AWP at the conference for the Association of Writers and Writers Programs, where we were both presenting. I believe it was just this last year. And when I sat in on your panel, I was fascinated by your statement that Mizrahi should conduct the peace talks and other negotiations with Israel's neighbors. Because you seem to think that being from the Middle East, Mizrahi would understand it better, and understand what their neighbors want. Could you give me the whys and the hows of that? It was quite a bold statement, and I was fascinated by that.
Yeah, I mean, my whole opinion about this, my perspective on this, really hinges on the concept of bargaining. Middle Easterns in general are kind of ingrained in our way of life. A elaborate, extremely nuanced process of bargaining that it impacts almost every one of our encounters with almost everyone in our lives. It's a on one level, it's a bonding that happens between people. On another level, I mean, there's obvious economic incentives for it, but at the end of the day, it really is a way for people in this culture to suss each other out, to kind of develop an intimate friendship. The ability to bargain with respect is a way for you to gain clout with the other person. Their ability to play along with you in this kind of tug of war and find a middle ground is also a way that creates a lot of trust and bond between people. And I believe I also mentioned this at the panel, that what is unknown to Westerners is that Middle Easterners in general uh, look very peculiarly on Westerners who don't understand the system of bargaining. We see them as somewhat naive and naive in their ways. You just got to kind of take your word at face value, and the ability to kind of negotiate around it and to be flexible around it and to give a little and take a little is not something that most Westerners, even the diplomats, really understand. And so that, and also the ability to drive a hard bargain. I mean, I know that currently we have a president in the White House who believes that he has invented the art of the deal. From a Western perspective, you know, that hardly qualifies as bargaining 101. So, and it's for that reason, I think that when all of these Middle Eastern politicians sit at a table with Westerners, there is a general lack of understanding that stems in part from this
Mhm.
situation, because the proposals that are presented, the way that they're understood, the way that they are countered, are always experienced outside of this specific, very specifically Middle Eastern context. And it makes any movement forward more difficult. Um,
Mm.
and and there is also an element in these in this quality of bargaining and negotiation that it has a lot of unfair play in it, and the other blind spot I've always believed for Western politicians is their inability to recognize the unfair play that comes to pass in these dynamics. So one of the most um, blaring is the negotiations among Iranian politicians and Westerners over the whole nuclear weapons issue. Uh, any Iranian watching these negotiations for from day one always rolls their eyes and is confident that the Islamic Republic of Iran is clearly lying and never ever intended to live up to any part of
Mm.
what it promised that it would do. History has proven that to be a fact. And, we end up faced with a situation where Western politicians and Western cultures are, kind of aghast as to how someone could promise something, even in writing, on a world stage, and proceed to do pretty much exactly the opposite without even blinking an eye. So, these are the nuances that I think have generally escaped anyone who has tried to negotiate any kind of a um, peace treaty, uh, especially with Israel and the Arab states. I think that for that reason, they would be better served to have um, some Mizrahi allies on their team to be able to open their eyes to some of these nuances and dynamics.
Very interesting. Um, as a last bit of wisdom, perhaps, or um, do you have a favorite bit of Mizrahi culture or tradition that you wish others would take to heart and perhaps make a part of the way they handle life and their relationships with their fellow human beings that you feel is particularly related to having been raised a Jew in Iran and carried your culture here with you?
That's a fantastic question. Honestly, I've never even thought about it. Um,
Where I would always go and ask a question like that is I'd go to what my grandmother would say to me.
I think Iranian Jews, even though this is, and I say this, wholeheartedly, is that it seems to be a human experience and very much a Ashkenazi and Sephardi experience. But I think that Iranian Jews have a um, much deeper, maybe more severe, more intense sense of commitment to family connections and family bonds.
Mm.
Keeping the family together, um, remaining united as a cohesive unit, um, is a value that drives almost everything that Jewish Iranian families do with respect to each other and with respect to living their lives. And the preservation of this bond, brings with it a lot of nuanced, um, a very nuanced honor system, a uh, very nuanced sense of flexibility and forgiveness. You you have to forgive family members at any cost. You have to overlook their shortcomings at any cost, because holding on to what separates you will ultimately cost the entire family unit greatly, because we can't afford to outcast even one from our midst.
Mhm.
So, we go to great extents to keep that uh, value sacred and alive. To this day, you see second generation Iranian Americans, Jewish Iranian Americans, who none of whom speak Persian, some of whom may not even be able to, frankly, um, identify, place on a map the city where their parents and grandparents came from in Iran, but they still choose to marry second generation Jewish Iranians. Uh,
Mhm.
and when they don't, the families kind of always have a little bit of a hiccup of like, well, how is this going to work?
Yeah.
How are we going to be able to integrate, with families who value individuality as a kind of a tenet of modernity and post-industrial Western life, um, and who tend to put so much more value on becoming your own individual, in spite of what it may mean to the family unit.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I think that that's something that has certainly guided my life and has enriched my life, and it has come with its own costs as well. But at the end of the day, um, even the costs have been worth it, because you get eventually in life, you get to an age where you really finally experientially begin to feel what that means and
Mhm.
understand the value of it. Uh,
Yes.
so I think that would be a nice thing to try to propagate among
Beautiful.
non-Iranian Jews in the world.
It sounds wonderful. Sounds absolutely wonderful. Thank you,
Thank
Human. So much, so interesting, so enlightening, and energizing to share it with you. Thank you so
thank you.
much about that. My guest today was Dr. Houman Sarshar, whose books include Esther's Children, A Portrait of Iranian Jews, and the Jewish Communities of Iran, and I hope soon a book about the boy dancers of Iran. That would be a wonderful book to read. As for me, my latest book is Daughters of Eve, which is an essay-based discussion workbook and a journaling guide that uses the stories of the women of the Hebrew Bible to explore who we are today and try to understand our current crises, concerns, and hopes for the future. Um, you can connect with me on my website at sallywienergrotta.com, as well as on Facebook, Twitter, sometimes on Blue Sky. And hey, guys, I'm finally about to get on Substack if I can figure out all the ins and outs. I hope you'll join me there too. And of course, you can always find me here on Tell Me More, a podcast of Judith Magazine, a journal of Jewish arts, letters, and empowerment. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Houman. This was just wonderful. And
Thank you.
let me know about the boys.
Absolutely, will do. Thank you so much. Wishing you all the best.
You too.